Is Benjamin Netanyahu's time up? The Israeli Prime Minister has failed again to form a new government, and his future will now be decided by the president. What happens in Israel if the political deadlock drags on? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the programme. I'm Imran Khan. 2 years and 4 elections later, Israel is still no closer to having a government. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu missed the deadline to form a coalition by midnight on Tuesday. His opponents now have a chance to end the run of Israel's longest-serving leader. Much of the impasse is due to Netanyahu's legal troubles. Many allies say they wouldn't work with a prime minister who's on trial for corruption. From West Jerusalem, Harry Fawcett takes a look at the options to break the stalemate.
The time may have run out on Benjamin Netanyahu's officially mandated period to build a coalition government, but that doesn't mean he's going to stop anytime soon. For all that this is like a political chess game, in one respect at least it differs. Neither side has to stop playing just because their own personal clock has stopped ticking. Indeed, we saw that during Netanyahu's mandate when the opposition leader, Yair Lapid, was doing everything he could to coax across the right-wing political leader, Naftali Bennett, onto his side, the change bloc, trying to get together a coalition to oust Netanyahu from power. He offered Naftali Bennett the option to go first in a rotational arrangement as Prime Minister. That's something that Netanyahu has also offered to Bennett, and he's piling on a huge amount of pressure against him, saying that it's his failure to commit to a right-wing government that means that one has not yet been built, that if he did so, there would be defections and they would get across the line to the 61 seats required in the Israeli parliament, the Knesset. There is also some pressure from within Bennett's own party, with at least one MK, member of the Knesset, saying that they would not be happy to join Lapid in what would have to be a very broad left-right coalition to oust Netanyahu. The greatest pressure, though, remains on Netanyahu himself. This is the greatest peril he's been in since the start of this political crisis. But if anyone knows how to play the game right up until the last minute, it is him, and the final whistle has not yet been blown. Harry Fawcett for Inside Story, West Jerusalem.
And let's bring in our guests in West Jerusalem. Gil Hoffman, Chief Political Correspondent at the Jerusalem Post. From London, Yossi Mekelberg, Senior Consulting Research Fellow at Chatham House. And in Tel Aviv, Gideon Levy, Columnist at Haaretz. Now, welcome to the programme. Let's begin in West Jerusalem first with Gil Hoffman. Is this the end for Netanyahu, or are we going to see yet another election in Israel?
For the time being, it's the end for Netanyahu as prime minister. I believe that a change government is going to be formed. A unity government will have Israeli politicians from the right to the left running the country together. And Netanyahu will be opposition leader and hope that he could bring the government down and make a political comeback. He's 71 years old. His father died at the age of 102. There's no politicians inside his own party who have the courage to try to bring him down. So the only thing that could really end Netanyahu's political career is a conviction in a court of law, and he is on trial.
But that trial seems to have been going on for many years. It hasn't come to a conclusion. He's won, or at least run 4 different elections in the last 2 years. He keeps fighting back. We can't write him off this quickly, surely.
No, you absolutely cannot write him off this quickly. Anything can happen in the trial. There had been some suggestion that he would get a Medvedev kind of figure from within his Likud to run the country while he works on the trial and then come back. He chose to keep on fighting instead and try to remain prime minister. He's banking on Yair Lapid and Naftali Bennett not being able to form a government together, the centrist and right-wing leaders together. Maybe it'll work, but I don't think we're going to 5th election.
In Tel Aviv, Gideon Levy, we've talked about this on this show before, the fact that Netanyahu's success isn't necessarily down to Benjamin Netanyahu. It's down to the fact that he doesn't really have a credible opposition. Is that the case still?
It is the case, but, in order not to have a meaningful opposition, it takes also some kind of qualities for the leader himself. I would argue with my friend before that there will not be fifth elections as it looks right now. Now it's afternoon in Israel. Maybe in the evening it will look different. But right now, fifth elections is the most probable possibility, as I don't see any alternative government, with all the respect to the unity government, to Yair Lapid, to Naftali Bennett. I don't see them having a majority.
But why do you see a fifth election? Surely, I've been to Israel. I've covered many elections many times. I've seen the frustration that Israelis have. And actually, a lot of people, when I was there last, said to me, if there's another election, we are just going to vote for Benjamin Netanyahu. We want an end to this. We just want a government. But that doesn't seem to have happened. Why do you think there'll be a fifth election?
For the same reason why there were fourth elections, third elections, and second elections. Because we are in a deadlock. Because Israel is divided now into two camps and only two camps. One camp which admires Netanyahu, and then the other camp who makes him as a demon, much more than he deserves, by the way. And both camps are not ready to compromise. And as long as he will be in the game, we will remain in this deadlock. And it's very bad news for Israel's politics. It's bad news also for the left in Israel, who is not capable of creating any alternative, not personally and not ideologically.
Yossi Mekelberg in London, one of the key defences Benjamin Netanyahu has had over the last few years, he has often sold himself as the one man that can defend Israel in the international community and sell them to the international community. And particularly, he trumpeted relations, and I use that word deliberately, with Donald Trump. That's gone away now. There's been a change of government in the US. Do you think Israelis have taken that to heart? Do you think they've taken a look at Netanyahu and gone, actually, he's not quite our friend in the international community that we thought? Or do you think this is a purely domestic thing and that's why we're in a political deadlock?
Well, I think we should look at the results of the last four elections. He has a very strong base, and this base is very loyal to him. I agree with Gideon that there is a division, but it goes beyond division into two camps. I think within these camps, there are division. They will support Netanyahu as long as it's convenient for them. The minute that he moves to the opposition, even temporarily, I don't think he will be there until he's 102. I think we are actually seeing the twilight of Netanyahu in power. This twilight might take a bit longer. It might depend on what happens in court. But at the end of the day, I think the minute that the mandate, the task to form government is moving to someone else, I think we'll see a new dynamic, a new momentum within Israeli politics. And I think, yes, Netanyahu has his achievements along the years, but compared to the damage that he has inflicted on the country in the last few years, the corruption, the division, the populism, I think more and more Israel understand that this is a time for a change.
Gideon Levy, do you think that's right? Do you think he has created damage and destruction to the image of Israel, and that's why you're in a deadlock again?
I totally understand Yossi's concern, and there are concerns of many, many Israelis. But by the end of the day, I think there was also a lot of exaggeration about the damages. Let's take, for example, the damages to Israel's democracy. Everyone is complaining what he did to the damage to court, to rule of law, and to democracy. But Israel is a very weird democracy because it's a democracy only for Jewish citizens. So imagine yourself in South Africa, in apartheid South Africa, someone is damaging the democracy there. Is it such a catastrophe? Is it such a damage? No, because by the end of the day, it is a partial democracy. So if you damage it or not, it's not so fatal. What is fatal is the fact that Israel is not a democracy, but an apartheid state. And therefore, I cannot share those concerns about Netanyahu destroying Israel's democracy.
Gil Hoffman, where are we at right now? We've heard so much about various kingmakers. Naftali Bennett, one of the opposition leaders. We've heard of Mansour Abbas, an Islamist leader who's connected to the Joint Arab List. These people were supposed to come to the rescue and give you a government. That hasn't happened. Are there any kingmakers left?
Absolutely. Mansour Abbas is still the kingmaker, and he's a fascinating one. Mansour Abbas is the result of the Abraham Accords. The Abraham Accords took the thesis that the Arab world does not have to wait for the Arab-Israeli conflict to be solved, the Israeli-Palestinian conflict to be solved, before reestablishing ties with Israel. And if Bahrain and Morocco and the United Arab Emirates can have relations with Israel, then Mansour Abbas said, so can Israeli Arab citizens. The Israeli Arab citizens weren't part of the Israeli political establishment. They were elected to the parliament, but never part of the government. And he's about to change all that. And in return for asking for things to improve the everyday life of the average Israeli Arab citizen, their infrastructure, their roads, their education. And that's something that even the most right-wing government could agree to, not talking about the Palestinian issue at all.
Gil, do you truly believe that, given that if he does a deal with Benjamin Netanyahu, a lot of his own base, Mansour Abbas's own base, are going to say, but you just did a deal with the devil, we can't vote for you again. Do you truly believe that he can do this?
Imran, that's what they voted for. They knew what they were voting for. They knew that they were voting for a man who was willing to cooperate with Netanyahu or with anybody else, who stood up to different politicians across the political spectrum and said, I'm going to care for my citizens for the first time, and not about the Palestinians, not about the wider Arab world. It's revolutionary, and it can change Israeli politics forever, because now out of the 120 members of Knesset, the amount of members of Knesset that are not willing to cooperate with an Arab party is only 5. It used to be 100. And this change cannot be ignored, and this will allow that change government to be formed, which will have in it centrists, right wing, left wing, Jews, and Arabs.
Yossi Mekelberg, do you agree? Do you agree that it's a revolution?
It is, but I doubt if it can last. If such a government could last, because at the end of the day, it will end, I think, as an interim government, which will govern for a short time until something else is happening. Because the bottleneck right now in Israeli politics is Netanyahu himself. The minute that he is going to opposition, there might be opposition within his Likud party too, and will try to replace him. I think the building block will change their positions there. I think it's welcome news that an Israeli-Palestinian party could join. It's long overdue, and that's why I agree also with Gideon. It's far from being the democracy that you would like to see. However, I also think that it can get even worse if there is no an immediate change, which will legitimize everyone in the society. It will be a way more inclusive one, and at the same time will deal also with the end of the occupation. Having said that, I don't see any, you mentioned kingmakers. I think there are so many kingmakers, but I doubt if there is any king in waiting. And the minute there is any government formed, I think it won't last enough to make a difference beyond the very fact that it brought to the end of Netanyahu's time in government.
Actually, this is an interesting scenario that's developing here, which I want to put to all three of you. But let me start with Gideon in Tel Aviv. Gideon, it seems to be that whatever government comes to process, if Netanyahu isn't in it, Benjamin Netanyahu is going to try and bring it down from within. So almost any government that gets formed is going to be a handicap. Is that right? Do you think that's going to happen?
No, time will show. I mean, if there will be a new government formed, what might make it fall will be the impossible structure of the government itself. Because you take everyone and you put in one pot and you try to cook it into an impossible dish, because how will they manage when the first challenge will be in front of them? They can't agree almost on anything except of the hatred toward Netanyahu. That's the only thing which unified them. And therefore, I don't think that Netanyahu will make them fall. They themselves will not survive. But, you know, never say never, and we might be surprised. Right now, it seems impossible to maintain a government, even not to form a government, but to maintain a government.
Yossi Mekelberg, I have to be very careful with my words here, but I'm going to be blunt. Is Benjamin Netanyahu a bigger threat to Israeli democracy out of power? Is he going to make problems for any government that might come if he's not involved?
I think he's a threat to Israel democracy, whatever left of it, and whether he's in opposition or in government, because his main issue right now is his court case. And in order to stay, to stop the derail his corruption court case and to avoid jail, he's ready to do anything. And he can actually be very dangerous in opposition, trying to galvanize his base and work against the rule of law, against democracy, against the justice system. So no doubt about it. And this is a time actually for his colleagues in the Likud party and others to try to stop him from doing that, if there is left any decency in this side of the political map.
Gil, the same question to you. Is he a bigger threat out of power?
What's wrong with having an opposition? He's going to be the leader of the opposition from the right. He's going to try to paint everyone in the government as leftists, as he has in demonizing his competition now in his 32 years in politics. It's worked for him quite well. And we are very much a democracy. In fact, we're too much of a democracy, having 4 elections over the past 2 years. And the very fact that the result of it is going to be a government that unites the people from right to left, I think shows we're more democratic than ever. I think that there's a lot that they can agree on, not just hatred of Netanyahu. Really, they can agree on anything except for the Palestinian issue. They completely agree on security issues. They completely agree on the economy. They definitely agree that the pandemic is a bad thing and we need to do everything possible to prevent it from coming back to Israel. There's a lot they can do.
But the Palestinian issue isn't really an issue within Israeli politics right now. So is that a thing? Right. Is that something that people are going to vote on? Gil?
No, that's the thing. See, the international community has this mistaken understanding that the Israeli-Palestinian issue is the be-all and end-all in Israeli politics when it hasn't been an issue for a very long time. We've had 4 elections that are very much about Netanyahu personally. And the Palestinians just canceled their election that would have been their first election in 16 years. What's going to happen is that the Arab world is going to continue to increase its relations and ties with Israel because it's in their own economic good for their people, regardless of the Palestinian issue. And the same thing is going to happen with Israeli Arabs improving their lives here inside Israel. People are moving on.
Yossi Mekelberg, how much damage did Netanyahu do, or how much did he do to make sure that the Palestinian issue wasn't an issue in domestic politics? Is that his legacy?
As much as I'm critical of Netanyahu's contribution in killing or trying to kill the two-state solution, is not the only one. I think there is almost across the board. And the fact that the Palestinian issue doesn't play into Israel's political system doesn't mean it doesn't play a role in the way that it affects Israel. It affects Israel every single day. The entrenchment of the occupation, how it affects the Israeli society, what happens to a nation that occupies and deprives other people of their basic human rights affects Israel. And part of what we see right now is as a result of decades of occupation. Now, he had this contribution, no doubt. And let's not forget, when you ask about the opposition, the contribution of Netanyahu's incitement in what happened in 1995 in the assassination of Yitzhak Rabin. So he's along, not only in his years in government, but also in opposition, contributed to this disaster that there is still no two-state solution. There is still not a fair and just solution for the conflict between the Israel and Palestinians, and it probably will continue like that.
Gideon Levy, what do you think? What is Netanyahu's legacy? Is it the destruction of the two-state solution, or is it the fact that he managed to, for a little while, bring the right to real power in Israel? Which one is it, do you think?
First of all, the left was in power for so many years And I didn't see the left, the Israeli Zionist left, doing much about the two-state solution. So let's not put it on Netanyahu's shoulders. It started much before. Israel never had a prime minister who really meant to put an end to the occupation or to create an independent, viable Palestinian state. So to put it on his shoulder for the good and for the bad is totally wrong. The two-state solution was never born, and now it's long time dead, and Israelis couldn't care less, and Netanyahu put his own contribution, but I think that Peace Nobel Prize winner Shimon Peres built more settlements than Netanyahu. So let's not put it on him. His legacy is that he put off the table not only domestically, the world lost interest in the Palestinians. The Arab world lost interest in Palestinians. The Palestinians are totally left to their own destiny right now without almost any supporters. This was never the case ever since 1948. The Arab world ignores them. Everyone ignores them. And this might be good news for Israel, except of one fact, that Israel remains an apartheid state. So it's very nice that we put it off the table and we live in this illusion, in this bubble of Israel's democracy, while 15 minutes away from my home, there is a military tyranny, one of the most brutal tyrannies on earth, nothing less but this.
Well, we are running out of time, but I do want to ask each of you a question. We've got about 3 minutes left, so I want you to tell me a prediction. If it's not Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, the Prime Minister of Israel, who will it be? Let's start in West Jerusalem with Gil Hoffman. Who do you think it might be?
Naftali Bennett, who was Netanyahu's protege as chief of staff, and proved himself to be very professional in his handling of the pandemic as defense minister, is going to be our prime minister, and the world will get used to it. Countries around the world have gone from having a very experienced leader to one less so, and the entire region hopes that he'll do a good job.
Yossi Mekelberg, it's interesting, if it is Naftali Bennett, he's often been called by certainly the Hebrew-speaking press as being Netanyahu light. I think that's what I want to say. Is he? Do you think he'll be the next prime minister?
He probably will be also a prime minister light. I don't think that's what Israel needs, but I think the way that this kind of Lego of a political system works, he might be part of a rotation with Yair Lapid. But again, I think even if it happens, it won't last for a very, very long time. And the most probable outcome would be a fifth election.
Gideon Levy, do you have any other predictions, or do you think it's Naftali Bennett as well?
No, it's very hard to imagine that a leader of a party of 7 seats, now it became even 6, because one already declared he doesn't go with him to such a government, will become prime minister. I mean, for God's sake, who exactly does he represent, Naftali Bennett? I mean, a very, very small group in Israeli society. It might happen, but it will not last. Lapid might replace him. Lapid might have a bigger base, but even Lapid, I can't see them really maintaining a government for 4 years now when Israel is so divided over other issues.
Well, let's thank all our guests, Gil Hoffman, Yossi Mekelberg and Gideon Levy. And thank you too for watching. You can see this and all our previous programmes again anytime by visiting our website, aljazeera.com. And for further discussion, go to our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. And you can also join the conversation on Twitter. We are at AJ Inside Story. From me, Imran Khan, and the whole team here, bye for now.